Hi everybody, welcome to Colorado Inside Out. I'm your host, Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's get a quick take on the death of Robin Williams and the fact that a house in Boulder became one of the many places where fans gathered to pay respects. Patty Calhoun from Westward, it came as a shock to the entire nation, but Boulder, Colorado quickly became one of the places where news outlets went because that's where a small memorial was taking form right in front of the house that was not the inside of the house, but the outside of the house that was used for the Mork and Mindy series back in the 70s. What did you think of Colorado becoming one of the center points of the story?
Well, people definitely wanted to express their grief. People loved Robin Williams, and that was where he really took off, was Mork and Mindy in 1978. It's so funny to remember that what people were thinking about Colorado back in 1978, they were thinking about John Denver, and they were thinking about Claudine Longet shooting Spider Savage, and they were thinking about Mork and Mindy. So it's not a huge surprise that Boulder still has a lot of flaky reputation to live down, and now they've got Caldera too. But you know, the memorial is sweet. It's lovely when people want to do that. Some of the better things that are happening are all the responses that are coming in to support programs that deal with depression. Alamo Drafthouse is doing 3 movies, Robin Williams movies, next weekend, and the money is going to CU's Depression Center.
I completely agree. It's nice to see that that's some sort of tragedy gets some sort of positive, at least some sort of outcome. That kind of awareness is great. John Caldera is a nice segue from Patty. Joining us as the president of the Independence Institute. David is not here, so you brought the requisite booze. It was nice that it came in a It came in a gun.
For Dave, this is a Tommy gun full of vodka.
Gotcha. Very nice. Very nice.
Which we've already emptied half of it, so that's pretty good.
What did you make? I mean, you're a Boulderite,
well,
so
you talk about
know,
flaky Boulderites. Our good neighbor Jared Polis was there with a cutout triangle on his shirt. Now, I don't know if that was meant to be respectful, but it just came across as, well, Polis weird, and it was too bad. That house has always been kind of a fun thing to go by. Back in college, you'd have fun with it. What hit me about the Robin Williams death was the difference in celebrity suicide, in that when Hunter S. Thompson decided to take his life, that was somehow celebrated. He made this big decision, and somehow that became artistic. Robin Williams seems much more sad because of mental illness, and you're telling me that Hunter S. Thompson didn't have a touch of that as well? It brings up lots of good topics. It brings again the danger of mental illness and how we treat it, but it's celebrity, and we all feel like we know this guy because we've spent hours with him, like him or not, and so it's someone we know.
Right. Eric Soderman, political analyst, here at the table. What did you make of the events, and obviously that Boulder being one of the center points?
Well, Boulder manages to find its way into so many stories. This one being a very sad one. It does take you back. It's a moment of nostalgia, back to the 70s, back to Mork and Mindy. I guess in terms of current tense, I've been impressed to the extent that this has become sort of one of those cultural moments where people stop and think and talk. We were driving across the Midwest in a couple days following this, and a couple of just coffee shops or places where we'd stop and grab a bite. That was the conversation, table after table. Hopefully there's some catharsis to it and some kind of constructive societal commitment around mental health issues. But it is one of those, take your breath away, oh my God, I can't believe that happened.
Alicia Caldwell from the editorial page of the Denver Post. Wrap it up for us.
Well, I was struck how the cultural moment expressed itself on digital platforms. You saw Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all of these venues really flooded by people looking to express themselves, looking to reach out, and very quickly, mental health resources were promoted. But the real downside, I thought, were some of the attacks on Robin Williams' daughter, Zelda Williams, for failing to post enough pictures of her dad on Instagram. It strikes me as what has happened with these platforms give people an immediate reach into your life where they might otherwise be people you would pretty much ignore. And it was just an interesting moment to see all the manifestations of it.
Certainly. Let's get to it. Former Denver Safety Manager and Deputy Mayor Butch Montoya announced this week that he believes it is time for the U.S. Department of Justice to get involved with the investigation of Denver Sheriff's Department. Meanwhile, Mayor Michael Hancock turned down a request from the City Council to have one of its members sit on the Executive Steering Committee of the reform process. Patty, this story just keeps growing, and arms and legs and different things, but this latest one that made the headlines today about the mayor deciding that no, there is not a place at the Executive Steering Committee table for the City Council seemed to be an odd turn. What do you think?
Very boneheaded on the mayor's part, or the mayor's staffer's part, whoever refused it and then held the line. We elect our city council representatives now, depending on, we may or may not like what kind of job they're doing, but they're representing us. So to not have one of them included on this steering committee, when it's not like there's a shortage of people on it. You have, what, 5 from the mayor's office on it? There's certainly room for at least one city council representative. I don't think the staff's suggestion that they could, they were going to be briefed at the mayor council meeting on Tuesday was enough. Clearly, it's not enough because 3 years into Mayor Hancock's term, we have ongoing problems at the Sheriff's Department. He came in on the tail end of a police scandal, that they'd gone through how many safety managers in just a couple months. And he did bring in a police chief from outside. I mean, he took action on that, but he's been very slow to take action on the sheriff's office. And we're also hearing discontent from the different citizen groups that they feel like they're just window dressing, that they aren't really being listened to. So I think anything you can do to get more of City Council's involvement is good.
John, it seemed to me that the mayor lost an opportunity to give himself some political cover, because if the City Council is on the steering committee and they have to come up with a controversial idea or a solution to it, you like to have somebody already helping to pass it, to get it through. Now it's just the opposite. Now you've given them carte blanche to be as competitive as they want. How did you feel when you saw the story?
Actually, first, the asking the feds to come in to evaluate. What a brilliant idea, because Lord knows that would only make the situation better, because they could handle it with their expertise. Of course, you want more people involved. This was a bad mistake by the mayor, but we have a strong mayor form of government here in Denver. For me, what's more interesting is that Denver, since there's a city and a county, does not have an elected sheriff. Let me say that again. So why do we have some of these problems? People might not realize that the sheriff's office, actually it's only a department here, is mostly in charge of taking care of the jails. That's their job. Most counties, 62 of them, only Denver and Broomfield have appointed sheriffs. Well, you don't have that kind of accountability directly to the people. That's why I believe there is so much in big cities distrust between the people and the police department, and you rarely see that in sheriff's departments.
Eric, it seemed like they've had a lot of bad weeks when it comes to the Sheriff's Department and Mayor Hancock, but you had members of the Colorado Latino Forum decide we're not going to be part of any of the task forces. It's political window dressing. Then you had Butch Montoya come out with his U.S. Department of Justice opinion. And then you have this to put the cherry on the sundae. What do you make of it?
Keeps getting worse. It keeps spinning in a way that doesn't look like the mayor is fully driving events or fully in control of it, fully on top of it. We've had this discussion before. I don't want to spend all my time on it, but John's reference to an elective sheriff, maybe there's something to it, but you only have to look 70 miles south to Terry Makita and other places as well. I'm not sure the governance structure is the sole solution here. I don't understand. I think it's a bigger issue, Dominic, than just whether City Council gets a representative or not. In the current construct that Hancock set up of that commission, I don't know why City Council is not represented. There's no good reason to my thinking. But I'm not sure why they have this thing quite so internal to City Hall to begin with. It's totally a City Hall kind of committee, commission, whatever it is. I would have gone the opposite way. I would have made this a high level, not with a Christmas tree of one representative from every kind of group, not that kind of committee, but a high level. The word blue ribbon is overly used, but a blue ribbon kind of thing with a couple of leaders of kick-ass, excuse my language, but kick-ass repute to come in and do this thing. One name that jumps to my mind is somebody like Bill Ritter. Whatever, the reviews of him were as governor, former Denver prosecutor, Denver residency, etc. Somebody who can be above the fray and not so worried about the politics of it and not so much in the weeds. I don't want to get fixated on one name, whether it's Ritter or somebody else, but that's the direction I would have gone, is to get this thing removed from City Hall and get it to a level of attention and expertise that is not there now. I'm surprised that hasn't happened.
Alicia, as we looked at this, we were, the producers and I, the show, were trying to figure, okay, well, why did the mayor make this decision? And as we looked at it, even through the article from the Denver Post, the only thing we could find was a comment from a city councilman that said, well, we were worried about the overburdened schedule of city council members, and that if you're, the only way to make that story worse is to come with that kind of an excuse. But you always have the inside track. Where are you at on this?
And the other thing that I saw along with, they're too busy, is, we have all experts on this panel, people who are real specialists in the jail. And I'm thinking, okay, who is that? And then I read the list and I'm thinking, the city attorney, the deputy mayor, the chief of staff. I know a little bit about their resumes, and these are not experts on the jail, on any kind of criminal justice issues, really. I mean, maybe Scott Martinez has a little bit more background than being a lawyer. But what Hancock needs is a lancing of this thing, and this just seems like a papering over. We'll come up with some recommendations, everyone will agree, and we'll move on. I was glad to see that he put Nick Mitchell on that panel, the independent monitor, because that is a voice from the outside. It should be, and I think he is. He's done a good job so far. But as Eric said, you need some other outside voices with real reputations for change and in-depth knowledge on some of these issues, and you're just not seeing that. And this won't go away. You paper it over, it'll just boil back up in another format, in another situation, and he'll have real problems on his hands.
I certainly agree. Denver was among the 80 U.S. cities to hold a rally on Thursday night honoring people who have been harmed in cases of police brutality. The protest comes 1 week after unarmed teenager Michael Brown was shot by police in Ferguson, Missouri. John, with this story has become a national and probably making some international headlines. Fortunately, at least tensions were calmed last night in Ferguson, but this has made a big deal here in Denver. What do you make of what's been going on, and how the kind of impact it might make here in Colorado?
First of all, I think we ought to compliment the grieving family, and that when his father said, "Please stop this." That was a remarkable thing to do in a moment of grief. It's hard to imagine what the man's going through. I worry about the incredible amount of coverage these isolated incidents get. I'm not saying we brush them under the table, but I think it makes a blemish on law enforcement. We need to remember that overwhelmingly, law enforcement has good relationships with the communities from which they work. And again, going back to my first point, yeah, occasionally you have problems with elected sheriff's offices, but there is that direct line of communication. There's every 4 years you have the opportunity to fire the guy at the top. You don't have that in a police department. And this issue, I think it's too easy to pile on cops in general when we need to look more specifically at these issues. And if there's criminal activity among the police force, it needs to be dealt with quickly and severely.
Eric, it seemed that we had a good lesson in handling this kind of situation when it was taken out of the hands of the local authorities who were obviously overreacting, whether it's tear gas or riot gear, and brought in, I believe it was an entirely different group of people who handle it much, much better. We just talked about the Denver Sheriff's Office and bringing it on an entirely different group. Maybe there's a lesson here.
I agree with you, and last night was better than the preceding several nights, but that was probably a day late and a dollar short in terms of changing the command structure and who was on the ground. I think what's happening in Ferguson points to the importance of what's going on in Denver here and the importance of Hancock, to use Alicia's phrase, lancing this thing, putting it in the past, making some meaningful reforms, meaningful structural changes, as opposed to window dressing. It is critical that whether it's police officers, sheriff department, whatever law enforcement people you're talking about, that they have the moral authority, that they have the credibility, that they regain the benefit of the doubt, all of which has been lost here in Denver and was clearly absent in Missouri. I used the phrase earlier in talking about Robin Williams of a cultural moment. It strikes me that Ferguson is also becoming a cultural moment where some of these paradigms, overused word, some of these paradigms are shifting. I'm particularly interested in some of the debate within the conservative community, the conservative punditry or what have you, where there is a definite divide between those who have historically give law enforcement every benefit of the doubt, and those who are now raising some serious questions about the extent to which we've militarized our police departments, to the extent to which these racial tensions continue to, as much as we want to be colorblind, and I and others have advocated that, we are not at that point yet, etc. Eric Erickson, who runs a blog called Red State, very conservative intellectual, has a wonderful column today raising some of those questions and very much playing against type in terms of his own background.
Alicia, what are your thoughts?
Well, not regardless, but we don't know what happened in that moment or moments between this young man and this police officer. We've heard conflicting accounts, and I don't think that can be solved instantly. But I think the police made several pretty big errors. They should have named the police officer right away. They since have, but they should have. It really angered the community, and you could see that again and again in tweets and in comments on television. And I understand that. You know, why isn't this guy's name out there? The second thing they did is the way that they handled the crowd. Now, I'm not quite as concerned about, I think it was bad visuals to have an MRAP out there, you know, a surplus mine-resistant vehicle, a top-mounted, some sort of, John would probably know the make and model, machine gun of some sort. And those are bad optics, bad visuals. But to me, what was more important was how they acted. They set out dogs on the crowd, and that just brings up all of these images from civil rights conflicts and struggles. They shot tear gas on people who had their hands up. They made it so much worse. And the one other thing I'll say about it is, if their narrative of what happened, you know, the police report that this young man apparently, they say, was involved in a robbery, to hold that for 4 or 5 days and just to allow a vacuum to occur where there's another narrative that takes hold that he was, you know, just had his hands up. And like I said, we don't know what happened, but by withholding the information, they allowed some other stories to get out there uncontradicted. And I think they made it far worse just by their own actions.
Patty, it seems a lot of lessons to be learned. Do you think cities will pick up on that as they're watching what's going on in Ferguson?
Well, you would hope so, but we see over and over that cities don't deal quickly with this. Certainly the cases weren't as egregious and the response wasn't as immediate, but 4 years ago here, which was the last time we were hearing about a federal investigation perhaps coming in, and then it would have been to investigate the Denver cops, you had a series of horrifying incidents that weren't dealt with quickly and weren't dealt with well. Fortunately, none were as awful as this, and you did not have people tear gassed, but you had the Denver diner incident. You had Alex Landau, a 19-year-old African-American kid who was beaten up by the cops for taking a wrong left turn, basically. And interestingly, today on NPR, they have an interview with Alex Landau, very thoughtful guy, poet now, working for improving citizen oversight here in Denver of the police authority. But on NPR StoryCorps, they did a really wonderful interview with Alex Landau and his mother. So I recommend going and listening to that and remembering how bad it could have gotten here.
Very true. $12 million of tax revenue has been collected from retail marijuana sales in Colorado so far, 60% below initial projections. Some lawmakers believe it is time to readjust the tax formula. A Colorado Department of Revenue market study points to the medical marijuana industry's low taxes as the reason for the low revenue numbers. Eric, while the politicians and lawmakers in Colorado didn't want to regulate marijuana, they were really looking forward to just trucks backing up to the Capitol full of tax revenue and dropping it on so they can spend on anything, and that hasn't come to pass. Do you think there's changes to come because of the formula, or it was just people getting a little anxious about what was going to happen?
I think the only financial projection that has come true for the new marijuana laws is probably the advertising revenue to Westward, which I think has probably exceeded anything anyone had in mind. Serious note, well, I guess I'll identify with the Denver Post editorial of a day or two ago that to talk about changing the tax structure now, 6, 7, 8 months into this thing, is a little premature. But there may come a point in time, let's see how this plays out over another, let's at least get a full year under our belt and maybe a couple of years under our belt, and then take a look at the tax structure. There is such a variance, obviously, now between how marijuana for recreational use is taxed versus medical marijuana that is tax-free, that anyone who is a regular user or anyone who is at all tax sensitive is obviously, to the extent that they can still use the medical outlet, why not? It saves you 20% or more. I think there was a notion that a lot of marijuana users were not going to be tax sensitive. That notion has been proven wrong. Obviously, the real issue is all the fraud that goes on in the medical marijuana game. There are plenty of cases out there of people who deserve medical marijuana where it is a critical part of their treatment or of their pain relief or whatever. But I'm still of the mind that that is a distinct minority compared to everyone who has their medical marijuana certificate. And if you really want to crack down on this, maybe ultimately you have to change your tax structure, but you also have to crack down on that fraud.
Alicia, what's the right response to the situation as we know it?
I think the first response, there are two responses. You could change the constitutional amendment that created the medical marijuana structure. That's a heavy lift. To tighten up, frankly, the chronic pain piece of it, because that's really not a medical diagnosis, and it's very difficult to prove or disprove chronic pain. Cancer, yes, we have tests for that. Glaucoma, yes, and there are studies and anecdotes about how that is useful, how marijuana is useful for patients who are suffering from those conditions. But the most efficacious way, I think, of narrowing the stream somewhat is to, frankly, crack down on these dispensary doctors who are, in the next room over or what have you, and making it a little more of a risk for them to engage in this sort of revolving door, stamp, here's your medical marijuana card. And I think there are many ways of doing it, and that would probably be the best way to go at this first.
Patty, too soon to think the party's over for politicians, or do they just need to be more realistic in the beginning?
Well, they need to hold their horses, because what's going to happen is you will see more states legalizing marijuana, which means you are not going to have recreational sales be the huge cash cow that people have thought about. Although all states seem to bring in enough money from liquor sales, for example, that they can cover the cost of enforcing liquor sales. And ultimately, that may be where we go with marijuana as the rest of the country begins to slowly legalize recreational marijuana. I think we will see some cracking down on medical marijuana cards, the ones that were so easy to get. And frankly, some people will decide at a certain point, I'll just go as they age out, or they cure their chronic pain. Reading Westward can be very painful. I feel for them. I completely understand why they need it. But sooner, I think that system too will begin to even out as there are other options for people as they decide they don't want their red card anymore or to be on file anymore as using marijuana.
John, finish up for us.
Well, let me talk about pot holding my bottle of vodka. And first of all, let me make it very clear, I was teased, oh, you should bring some booze in, and now none of them took any of it. That's why it's here. It's not just my alcoholism. The laws of supply and demand cannot be broken. One of the most enjoyable scenes was watching Republicans, conservatives in the state Senate argue for a lower tax rate on the pot that they hated, because they knew that when you tax things too high, it drives it underground. Also, since this amendment allows recreational pot to be gifted and grown, there is an easy black market for this. This is not a surprise. We said it was going to happen, and I'll disagree with Eric. As somebody who is premature, I think now is the time to talk about lowering the tax rate, because the state will get more money, and we will be able to get more of these sales above ground.
Let's get to our very favorite part of the show, Disgrace of the Week. Patty, as always, start us off.
I have got to return to Boulder, the Boulder County Fair banned little Amy, the littlest woman in the world, from the Boulder County Fair because it was just too tasteless, not family friendly, but she will be at the Colorado State Fair. if this woman wants to earn her living this way, we have the tallest men, we have the strongest men, I guess we could have the littlest woman. But not in Boulder.
John, I'm not even sure I want to throw that segue to you, but go ahead. You're next.
I went to the Denver Comic Con, and Lou Ferrigno, who is unreasonably large, was there selling pictures of himself. So it's okay for Lou to be big, but we need to make sure that the little lady from Haiti goes without an income, because that's my hometown of Boulder. I want to wrap on the Denver Post's story selection. So Mike Kaufman has a brain freeze moment. That gets into it. While his opponent, Andrew Romanoff, spends about 15 minutes defacing with chalk his opponent's office building where everybody walks. And then when the janitor comes, who's going to be the guy stuck cleaning it up, Andrew gets in his Prius and bolts. Now, it seems to me that if a brain freeze is worth people knowing about, I think going onto private property and running away is something that people ought to know as well.
Just the beginning of a very fun season. Eric?
Indeed, the beginning of a fun season. Let me go national. Obviously, we know Washington's completely dysfunctional these days and nothing is getting done. That said, given the challenges in this world and the challenges at home, a 5-month congressional recess, I'm not so sure. A presidential vacation on Martha's Vineyard under these circumstances, particularly given the world situation, I'm not so sure. I'm not sure this presidential vacation is being quite what Mr. Obama hoped for, but maybe it would have been better for everyone just to stay home and put the nose to the grindstone.
Alicia?
Bob Harvey, we think, who's still employed by the Black Forest Fire Department, took leave for PTSD June 4th, came back, cleaned out his office, hasn't said anything to anyone. No one knows whether they still have a fire chief or not. He just needs to make a decision and communicate with the department.
Less than 30 seconds left, so make it very quick. Say something nice about somebody.
Amy Van Dyken out of Craig Hospital.
Here, here.
Suing citizens because of voting problems. I think we ought to sue everyone who voted for Obama, but that's a different thing.
Eric?
Helen Thorpe, Colorado treasure in many respects, getting great national reviews of her new book, Soldier Girls.
The Denver School of Science and Technology in the Adams 50 districts for figuring out at least one path to raising test scores.
That's all the time we have tonight. Thanks for tuning in. For our viewers watching our live stream on our website right now, stay tuned for a special behind-the-scenes segment. And for our broadcast viewers, we'll see you next week. And don't forget to check out our web-exclusive CIO postgame at cpt12.org every Friday afternoon. For everyone here at Channel 12, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thanks for watching. Good night. Hi, my name is Dominic Dezzutti. I'm executive producer and host of Colorado Inside Out. I am here prepping for the show. It's Friday just before 11:30. I'm here with our producer, Gabrielle Bryant. And the two of us, before every show, what we'll do is we'll get together and go over the script. Make sure that what we wrote the day before is still applicable, if any issues have changed. More importantly, we read through the script to make sure that what we wrote yesterday is actually going to sound decent today. That's usually easier said than done.
My job on the show is to check with Dominic occasionally throughout the week, and we send topics back and forth to each other as far as checking the news headlines and seeing which stories would fit best with the show. I've worked on the show for some months now, and so I'm getting the hang of some of the ideas that the panel likes to talk about and some of the things that they don't necessarily like to focus on. So my job is to check with him on the topics. He approves them for me, and then I try my hand at writing some of the topics and making them clear for viewers. Also feel like it's my role to approach the topics in a way that people who aren't necessarily so focused on politics will still be able to understand what we're talking about. So I try to write it in a way that people like me could understand it.
Gabrielle, it's the perfect sounding board that if I'm going way into too much detail. And so the normal viewer, she's a very educated viewer, and so are our viewers, but she's making sure that it makes sense and not just to political junkies like myself. So she's understanding that role. That's critical to what she does in the show. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Something that a lot of you may not know is that any trivia question in the world he can answer, and if he doesn't have the answer, which he always does, he can find it for you in under 5 seconds.
Just a nice way of explaining all the different stuff in my office between Yoda dolls and Harry Potter posters. I'm a person of the people. What we're going to do right now is read through the script to make sure it makes sense and sounds good, because it's one thing to write a topic, but it's another thing to make sure it sounds intelligent coming out of your host's mouth, which can sometimes be a challenge for this particular host. We do our very best to make sure that the script doesn't set a bias one way or the other. It doesn't put any sort of judgmental words. Now, no script is going to be perfect, but that's what our panel is for. They're supposed to bring the opinion. Our topics are supposed to simply set up the idea and then let our panel get to it. So we try to get as basic as possible.
I'm just making copies for of the scripts for each of the guests, each of the panelists, and I also make a copy for Dominic. I do it on this blue paper because it's not so distracting for viewers when they're watching it.
With the trusty makeup, tea, I think we're in good shape. Let's go.